Believe me, this is one of the best audiobooks I've heard in 2024. Join me in Seth Yeager's adventure, where intrigue and the raw force of a seemingly ordinary young man meet. Watch as Seth, armed with nothing but his wit, medicinal knowledge, and martial arts skills, faces down challenges most would run from. Longford Kingdom, in a deep mountain forest in the north. Chief, I'm back. Tonight's dinner is hare meat. In the deep mountain forest, there were several wooden houses. A teenager who looked 16 or 17 years old named Seth Yeager held onto several plump hares and leaped vigorously on the uneven rocks to reach the front of a wooden house. Seth had lived with Chief since he was a child, practicing martial arts, collecting herbs, learning medicine, and reading. Creak. Seth pushed the door open, and his face changed dramatically in the next second. He threw the hares in his hands away. On the futon was an elderly person sitting cross-legged, head drooped, and seemingly breathless. Chief, what's wrong? Seth was shocked. He first checked Chief's wrist and found that there was no pulse. Seth quickly took out a silver needle and tried to do dry needling on Chief. It didn't work. He tried to pass his own energy over, but it was still useless. A strong feeling of sadness welled up in his heart. He had lived with Chief since he was a child, and he found it difficult to accept this sudden bad news. At this time, he found a note next to him. He picked it up and read it. My dear apprentice, a few days ago, I had a feeling that my time was coming to an end. After I die, there are several things I want you to do. First, I saved the chairman of Herman Corp many years ago, and he had given me a 5% share in his company. Last year, I transferred them to your name. After you leave the mountain, go and look for him. Second, I had run a thorough investigation on King Pearl and found out who possesses it at the moment. It's with a rich merchant's daughter named Alaska Lowell in Jonesville. She's now a freshman at Jonesville, and I have arranged for you to enroll in her university. You can go and register before the 8th. Remember to get your hands on the King Pearl. Only by obtaining it can you break through that barrier and become the Medicine King. Third, do not bury me after I leave. Just burn everything to the ground. Chief, I'll definitely fulfill your wishes. Seth bowed his head to Chief 3 times and turned to leave. He set a big fire and burned down several of the wooden houses. In the fire, the dead chief suddenly opened his eyes. He reached out and pulled off a human skin mask, revealing an unprecedentedly beautiful face. The woman looked so noble and unsullied. She had bright and shining starry eyes that could make people fall in love with her at first sight. An invisible force surrounded her body, preventing the fire from getting closer. From afar and with a hint of reluctance in her eyes, she looked in the direction that Seth had gone. The young one has now dived into the sea. I hope you grow up quickly, or else when disaster strikes, no one will be able to escape. An hour later, Seth came down from the mountain. He was wearing a pair of washed-out jeans and a t-shirt, canvas shoes on his feet. He was also carrying a cloth bag with some dry food and medical supplies inside. An expensive-looking car was parked in front of him. There were 2 strong men with short sticks in their hands, looking nervous. In front of them was a wild beast over 2 meters long. The beast had a donkey's head, a wolf's body, and a ferocious look in its eyes. Even though the 2 burly men were skilled, they were extremely frightened at the moment. The fierce aura emanating from the beast made them shudder. However, they could not retreat as their boss was behind them. Diamenit, what bad luck. Why did the fuel tank have to break down right now? If something happens to the boss, we're done for. The man in the car had tremendous influence, and if something happened to him, God knows how big of a storm it would cause. Gramps, you have to hold on. Inside the car, Sage Summer anxiously watched over her grandfather. They were initially planning to take a break today, and Sage planned on having her grandfather keep her company. Unexpectedly, he suddenly fell ill. Then, the fuel tank started leaking, and a wild beast emerged in front of them. This made Sage feel endless despair. Roar! Outside the car, the wild beast let out a roar, making Sage's heart tremble. Immediately after, screams were heard. The 2 strong men were knocked down to the ground. The beast's cold teeth shimmered with terrifying luster. What do we do? What do we do? Sage was so anxious that tears flowed down her face. Just when she was completely at a loss, she suddenly saw a dark shadow flash outside the car window. Then, she heard the wild beast shriek. Sage quickly looked ahead. That was when she saw a scene that she would never forget her entire life. The wild beast with a ferocious appearance and a body the size of a tiger was actually sent flying by a young man. Seth waved his fist and snorted. A donkey-headed wolf? Huh? That's rare. Roar. Blood flowed from the corner of the donkey-headed wolf's mouth. It crouched down, its eyes flashing with bloodthirsty light, constantly changing its position. It was very frightened of the man in front of it. Seth stamped his right foot on the ground, and several stones bounced up, which he caught and threw as weapons. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The stones flew through the air. The donkey-headed wolf was too large to dodge the attack. The force of each stone was terrible and made the beast scream loudly. In the end, it turned and ran away. Seth looked at the two strong men's injuries. He looked around and picked some small horseweeds from the roadside, crushed them, and then applied them to the wounds of the two men. Horseweeds looked like wild daisies and had very good hemostatic and pain-relieving effects. Thank you, young man. Are you a doctor, young man? Seth nodded slightly. I know a thing or two about medicine. The two were overjoyed. Please save our chairman. He's in the car right now. Seth nodded and walked to the side of the car, opening up the door. Sage looked over at Seth, who appeared like a wild man, and instinctively shrank back. What are you doing? Seth looked at the old man. I'm here to save him. Sage immediately refused. No way. You're just a random wild man. How can you save my grandfather? Don't make it worse for him. Even though Seth had just saved her, she was not very grateful about it. Nonetheless, her grandfather had been suffering from this disease for many years, and even many famous doctors in the country were helpless. How can a little wild man like him have the ability to help her grandfather? Seth explained. I used to travel around with Chief and practice medicine. My medical skills are pretty good, and I've never killed anyone so far. Sage asked, Do you have a medical license? Seth shook his head. No. Sage was angry. No? A self-proclaimed doctor who dares to treat my grandfather? Get lost. Seth frowned. He had a bad temper and was a little tyrant in the mountains. If it were not for Chief constantly urging him not to hit women, he would have slapped her across the face. Suppressing his anger, Seth said coldly, Whatever, then you can watch your grandfather die. He turned around and wanted to leave. Young man, please, help me. The old man spoke up with difficulty. Sage was shocked. Grandfather, he's just some random wild man. How can he save you? What if he makes it worse? It's okay. This young man's medical skills. I'll leave it up to you now. Seth nodded slightly. Well, Chief often said that saving one life was the most important thing above all else. Hence, Seth went into the car. Nonetheless, Sage pounced on him, waving her hands around. You stinky wild man. Get out of here. Get lost, you stinky savage. Don't you dare get in my car and don't you dare touch my grandfather. Sage raged like an angry little cat. Seth was furious. This woman must be crazy. He grabbed Sage's hand and pulled her out forcefully. Sage struggled hard and screamed, let go of me, you stinky hooligan. Smack, smack. Seth did not tolerate her behavior, so he lifted her by the waist and gave her 2 hard beatings. Sage's small body trembled, and she turned her head in disbelief. How dare you? Seth threw Sage to the ground and threatened her. Shut up, or I'll do something you might regret. You can't escape in this wilderness on your own, and even beasts can't defeat me. So think carefully. Sage was immediately terrified by him. However, Seth no longer bothered with her. He turned and went back to the car. First, he checked the old man's pulse and nodded slightly. Then he disinfected a silver needle and swiftly inserted it into the old man's trigger point. The old man had been struggling to breathe, but after Seth's needle was inserted, his breathing gradually became calm. Outside the car, the 2 bodyguards saw this scene and looked surprised. Seeing that their boss was fine, the 2 bodyguards did not disturb them. The old man slowly opened his eyes and weakly said, Thank you, young man. Your medical skills are indeed excellent. Seth checked his pulse again and said, Your meridians are blocked, which resulted from a failed breakthrough in the martial arts realm. The old man's eyes flickered. You're quite sharp, young man. Do you also dabble in martial arts? Seth did not answer his question. Chief had told him a long time ago that he must not easily reveal his martial arts skills unless necessary. Otherwise, it could lead to big problems. Hold on a little. I'll help you clear the blocked meridians. With your ability as a 4th-rank warrior, all the physical problems in your body will disappear. The old man's pupils shrank violently, and his breathing became shorter. Young man, you. Did you just say that you can cure my injury? How could he not be excited? The old man was also a powerful figure. Nonetheless, he had been unable to utilize his strength due to a failed force breakthrough, and his power had declined significantly over the years. Despite seeing numerous doctors, they were all at a loss. Seth nodded at him slightly. After all, the old man's condition was not severe. For someone who was only a sliver away from having the medical skill of a medicine king, it should not be difficult. If you can really heal my injury, young man, feel free to ask for anything you want. He was too excited. He had been desperate all these years. The old man had given up on treatment long ago and only wanted to live a little longer to pave the way for his son. How could he not be happy when he suddenly heard that he still had a chance to be cured? Seth frowned. This old man seemed to be wealthy, so why was he not more composed? Then, he removed the silver needle from the old man's body and disinfected it before inserting it again. This time it was different, as he used the unique skill of the 13 needles to treat him. Once the needle was used, it could cure all of the world's calamities and even make it difficult to die. The old man's breathing paused. Seth was exuding an aura that baffled him. In an instant, all 13 needles were released. Warm currents flowed inside the old man, repairing his damaged meridians at a rapid rate. A ruddy complexion gradually appeared on the old man's face, which had been very pale before. Boom! A powerful aura burst out of him like a sleeping wolf suddenly awakened. Outside the car door, the 2 bodyguards trembled, nearly falling to their knees. There was a look of horror in their eyes. Inside the car, Seth was unaffected by the old man's aura. He was just a 4th-ranked warrior anyway. Warriors were divided into 9 ranks, with the 1st rank being the lowest and the 9th rank being the highest. There was also a non-warrior rank before the 1st rank. Moreover, the 1st to 3rd ranks were called lower-rank warriors. The 4th to 6th ranks were the middle-ranked warriors called masters. The 7th to 9th ranks of high-ranked warriors were called grandmasters. As for Seth, he was a 9th-ranked warrior and deemed a grandmaster.
I'm recovered. Eva truly recovered.
The old man felt the powerful force in his body and wept with joy. He had not felt this kind of power for a long time. My dear benefactor, this old man's name is Jack Summer. Thank you for your help. After speaking, Jack gave the deepest bow to Seth, and Seth calmly accepted it. I didn't treat you for nothing, Seth said. According to the rules of my medical practice, I charge only $1 to treat poor families. However, I charge $3,000 to treat the wealthy, and you also have to donate $100,000 to charity. Jack thought that Seth would ask for hundreds of thousands, or even millions of dollars in compensation. Even if he did, Jack would have given it to him. After all, his life was worth more than that. He never expected Seth to ask for only $3,000. His appreciation for Seth increased twofold. This was a principled young man. I didn't get your name yet, dear benefactor. Seth Yeager. Ah, so you're Mr. Yeager. The 2 got out of the car, and Jack laughed heartily. Meeting you today is simply a blessing in a lifetime for me. The 2 bodyguards were stunned. Sage, who had been sitting on the ground, was also dumbfounded. Was Jack not barely alive earlier? He looked fine right now. Gramps, are you okay now? Sage quickly got up and ran to Jack's side, simply overjoyed. Jack smiled and nodded. I'm all right now. Not only is my internal injury healed, but my martial arts realm has also been restored. That's great. Sage jumped with excitement. Immediately after, she pointed at Seth fiercely and said, He bullied me just now, Gramps. You have to help me teach him a lesson. Jack's face quickly sank. Nonsense. He's the Summer's benefactor. Quickly apologize to him. Sage looked incredulously at Jack. Are you crazy, Gramps? I'm your most beloved granddaughter. If you refused to help me when I got bullied, fine. But now you want me to apologize to this smelly wildling. Jack tried to persuade her earnestly. Gidge, this is the person who saved my life. Without him, Grandpa probably wouldn't be alive today. Be good and apologize to him. I don't want to. Sage's eyes turned red. He clearly bullied me first. Why should I apologize? Will you help me or not? If you don't help me, I'll just tell the boy pursuing me to come over and kill him instead. As a pampered young lady, how could she allow herself to experience such humiliation? Seth merely shook his head as he watched. This was a spoiled child, self-centered and not caring about anyone else. Jack was furious and was about to raise his hand to hit her, but he could not bring himself to do it. After all, she was his most beloved granddaughter, and he could not bear to hit her. In the meantime, Sage had already picked up her phone. I'll call someone to come over and kill you, you smelly wild man. Everyone's temper had a limit, let alone Seth, who was known as the little tyrant. This woman was continuously referring to him as a wild man. This made him extremely angry. Hence, he took a step forward and got in front of Sage. Smack! A heavy slap landed on Sage's face, causing her fair and tender skin to immediately swell. The crisp sound echoed, causing Jack and the two bodyguards to stare in shock. Sage covered her face. The intense pain and shame almost drove her crazy. She let out a sharp cry. Ah! How dare you hit me? Seth ignored her and turned to Jack instead. Your granddaughter's lawless and doesn't have respect for her elders. I taught her a lesson for you. Any objections? Jack smiled bitterly. I dare not object. My granddaughter has indeed been too spoiled. Kill him, Gramps. Kill him now. Sage's voice became hysterical, on the verge of madness. She had never been slapped in her entire life. Shut up, Jack shouted, exuding some of his warrior aura. It seems that I've spoiled you too much in the past. Apologize to Mr. Yeager immediately, or from now on until you graduate from university, don't expect to have a single penny of pocket money. All your bank accounts will be frozen and you'll have to scavenge for a living. Sage looked at Jack in disbelief. She had never been so severely criticized by her grandfather. Meanwhile, Jack's expression was cold. His tone was firm and uncompromising. Sage knew that if she did not comply, her bank accounts would truly be frozen.
I'm so sorry,
she said to Seth with much difficulty. The humiliation she felt in her heart had reached an unbearable level. Inwardly, she was roaring wildly. When I get back, I'll have someone dismember you to bits. She lowered her head, and her eyes were full of resentment. Seth waved his hand. Forget it. It's beneath me to argue with a brat like you. He was about to turn and leave. Rumble. At this moment, a helicopter flew overhead. The huge air current blew foliage and dust about. One of the bodyguards said, Support has arrived. Jack bowed to Seth and said, Mr. Yeager, please come with me back to the summer household, and let me repay you properly. Seth had another idea in mind. Is your house in Jonesville? Yes, it is. Okay. Then do give me a lift, and drop me off near Herman Corporation. He did not have much money on him, and he figured he should first get his share of the stock and then find a way to get close to the girl who owned the King Pearl. Jack was delighted. Please, Mr. Yeager. Then he looked at Sage, who was full of grievances, and his heart softened. What are you standing there for? Come over here. Sage lowered her head and walked over. After a moment, the helicopter flew away. Two bodyguards stayed to wait for the tow truck. Inside the helicopter, Jack occasionally chatted with Seth, trying to get some information from him. However, Seth had already become very skilled and savvy under his master's various training methods in the past and had not given Jack any useful information. As for Sage, she was sitting in the corner holding her phone. She then sent a message to someone in her contacts. Finley, you said you wanted me to be your girlfriend, right? Help me with something and I'll fulfill your wish. In Jonesville, inside a luxurious villa, Finley Zachary was lying by his swimming pool with two beautiful women in swimsuits attending to him. Finley was the only son of Herman Corp's Quincy Zachary. A dandy by nature, Finley had a notorious existence in Jonesville. He was known for harassing countless girls and even causing some pregnant ones to commit suicide. His phone suddenly rang, and he was surprised when he looked at it. Ha ha ha. The day has finally come for me. Finley had been pursuing Sage for a long time. In addition to being attracted to Sage's appearance and figure, it was even more important to him that she came from a powerful family. The Summers were much stronger than Herman Corporation. Jack, the patriarch of the Summers, used to be a middle-ranked warrior. He had taken in several apprentices who now had significant positions in the business and political worlds. Even his own son was very talented. In the past, when Finley pursued Sage, she barely batted an eyelid at him. Hence, Finley immediately sent a message back. Soon, There was a reply to the message. I was bullied by a stinking wildling. He'll be at Herman Corp in about half an hour. When the time comes, come over and break his hands and feet. There was a flash in Finley's eyes, and he immediately got up and told the two women in swimsuits, bring me some clothes. Immediately after, he made another phone call. Herman Corp had also hired a group of thugs who could be mobilized with a single phone call. More than a dozen people gathered almost immediately. Then, Finley went to Herman Corp in high spirits. Half an hour later, a helicopter landed on the rooftop of Herman Corporation. Jack had already arranged this with Quincy in advance, which he naturally agreed to for such a trivial matter. Moreover, Jack would owe him a favor. Seth slid down the rope and landed quickly on the rooftop. Jack shouted, goodbye, for now, Mr. Yeager. Sage had a look of resentment on her face and sent another text message to Finley. At that moment, Finley had already brought a group of people downstairs. As soon as he received the message, he immediately led his men up the rooftop. Meanwhile, in Quincy's office, Quincy ordered his secretary, let's go. Let's head to the top floor. A person escorted by Jack Summer must be someone from a big background as well. At the moment, Seth took a breath and furrowed his brow. The air quality here is really poor. He looked around and walked toward the door. Clang. He had not even reached the door when it was suddenly kicked open. Dozens of fierce and burly men rushed out and surrounded Seth. Finley walked in last, and as he glanced at Seth, his face immediately filled with disdain and disgust. He really is a savage. Go now. Break his hands and feet. Seth remained calm and composed. Who are you guys? I don't think I've offended anyone like you before. Finley grinned menacingly. You little wild man, have offended my girlfriend, and now you'll have to pay the price. Seth immediately thought of Sage. He could not believe she would be so outrageous. That girl was hopeless. You'd better get out of my way, Seth said calmly. I don't want to hurt anyone. As a doctor, saving lives and helping the wounded was his top priority. However, when Finley's people heard his words, they all burst into laughter. Ha ha ha. Am I hearing this right? For this kid to even say such things, his brain must not be working well. Finley also laughed out loud. After laughing, his face turned dark. All right, take care of him quickly. I still have to go find my girlfriend. Thinking of Sage's hot figure and innocent face, he got even more excited. The dozen men drew their expandable batons out from their pockets and fiercely attacked Seth. I gave you guys a chance, but since you didn't want it, don't blame me for what comes next. Seth's eyes grew cold, and he was about to take action. At that moment, an angry shout rang out, Hold it! Quincy walked up to the rooftop with his secretary. When he saw this scene, he immediately shouted, Hold it! The group of more than a dozen strong men stopped moving. Dad! Finley was taken aback. What are you doing here? Quincy asked. What happened here? Hence, Finley told Quincy what had happened in a low voice. There was a flash across Quincy's eyes, his brain thinking quickly. He could more or else guess what had happened. Seth probably had happened to give Jack a hand but had offended Sage at the same time, leading to this situation. It had to be said that Quincy was indeed shrewd. Then, he waved his hand and said, If that's the case, carry on. At this moment, Seth suddenly spoke up. Are you Quincy Zachary? This was the Herman Corp building, and in Chief's will, he had left some basic information about Quincy. Finley grew furious. Are you someone who can call my father by his full name, you savage? Seth ignored him. So it is you. That's good. I came here to look for you. Oh, Quincy was a bit surprised. What does a mountain man like you want from someone like me? My master is Neil Long. Donk. Quincy's mind trembled, and his pupils narrowed immediately from a simple sentence. Dad, what's wrong with you? Finley was surprised by Quincy's expression. My master saved you back then, and you gave him 5% of your company stocks, which I will sell back to you now at the market price. Just give me the cash. Quincy's expression changed continuously, but he finally smiled gently and said, So you're the disciple of my benefactor. There's no problem then. Let's go to the office to talk in detail. He gestured the way to Seth. Finley was shocked by this. Dad, what are you doing? Does this wild man really own 5% of our company's stocks? Even Quincy himself only owned about 15%, and he was the largest shareholder. Seth's arrival currently made him the third largest shareholder. So would his status not already be above Finley's? Quincy scolded. Shut up. Then, he smiled beamingly at Seth once more. Please, this way. Seth nodded slightly and walked in. Once he entered, Quincy's smile disappeared instantly, and his expression was filled with hate. Close the door and kill him. Yes, sir. More than a dozen strong men rushed in, and Finley closed the iron door with excitement on his face. Dad, after we kill him, his shares will belong to us, right? Quincy nodded. That's right. The agreement was that we needed that little bastard's signature for it to take effect. So long as we kill him, these shares will belong to us forever. 5% of the shares were worth over 200 million according to the current market value, which was a huge sum of money. Bam, bam, bam. There were sounds of collisions behind the door, and the two father and son looked at each other while laughing cruelly. Soon, the sound inside died out. Then, Finley took out his phone and eagerly opened the iron door, saying, We've truly killed two birds with one stone this time. Not only did we get the shares for free, but I got Sage Summer too. Yang! The door opened, but Finley's expression instantly froze. He was not looking at the scene of Seth's tragic death, but saw him standing in front of him, and scathed. Meanwhile, all of his henchmen were laying on the ground, foaming at the mouth and convulsing. What? Surprised. Seth said coldly. Sure enough, Chief was right. The world was full of danger. He never thought that he would be ambushed while trying to reclaim what belonged to him. If he did not know martial arts, he would probably be dead by now. Finley backed away in horror. Quincy also quietly stepped back, feeling a little stupefied. Seth alone took care of more than a dozen burly men, and his clothes were 100% intact. This was enough to prove that Seth's strength was far superior to that of his lackeys. Are you a martial arts warrior? First or second ranked? Quincy asked solemnly. Judging by Seth's age, even if he was a first-ranked warrior, he would have great future achievements. Seth said, Let's head down and sign the contract. I have something else to do. He appeared incredibly calm. It was not because Seth was being magnanimous. It was because he saw the black aura on Quincy's forehead and some spots on the back of his hand. Those were corpse spots. It meant that Quincy's days were numbered. When Chief saved him back then, he must have left a backup plan, not fully curing him all at once. Just in case Quincy goes back on his words in the future. Quincy was slightly stunned. He thought Seth would be furious and beat them to a pulp, but he did not expect the other party to be so calm. With his thoughts turning wild, Quincy nodded repeatedly. Okay, please follow me. Now that their lives were in Seth's hands, they did not dare to make any unusual movements. When they arrived at Quincy's office, he immediately took out a document from the drawer and said, Please sign here. Seth quickly flipped through the document. Despite never having attended school, his knowledge was sufficient. These were all thanks to Chief. After looking through the document and finding no problem, Seth signed his name on it. Okay, according to the current stock price, the value of the shares in your hand is 200 million. Should I transfer the money to you now? Quincy acted very humble, completely devoid of his usual ruthlessness. It should be noted that he was known as the War Wolf in the Jonesville business community. He acted fiercely and liked to kill decisively. Yet now he was acting like a newborn baby. If this were made known to the outside world, it would be earth-shattering. Seth took out a note with his account number and said, Wire the money here. Quincy nodded and personally made the transfer. He then showed Seth the computer screen and said, Here, the money has been transferred, but because the amount is relatively large, it will usually take up to 12 hours to show in your account. Seth was also aware of this. The matter settled, he did not plan to stay any second longer and left immediately. Quincy gestured at Finley and said, Go and escort our benefactor out. Finley suppressed his displeasure and led Seth out of the office. Once they left, the smile on Quincy's face disappeared, replaced by the sinister expression of a starving wolf. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. Hello, yes, is this the bank? I just transferred some money, and there's a bit of a problem. Please intercept it for me. A large transfer like this could easily be intercepted. After getting confirmation from the bank, Quincy hung up the phone. There was a cold smile on his lips. Don't think that you're getting my money that easily. Then, he sent a message to his hired thugs. He told them to all wear suits and bring weapons to Herman Corporation. In Quincy's opinion, even if Seth was a second-ranked warrior, he could not beat the 100 or so people under his control. If you dare step foot in here again, I'll have your blood splattered across the walls. Meanwhile, Seth had left Herman Corp and looked down at his clothes. He was planning on buying a new outfit and a backpack. His current appearance was too shabby, attracting strange looks wherever he went. However, just as he was about to enter a clothing store, he was chased out. Get out! Get out of here! Where did a beggar like you come from? At the entrance of the store, a middle-aged woman pointed at Seth and cursed loudly. Get out of here, and don't hinder my business. In her eyes, Seth, who was dressed in rags and carrying a backpack covered with many patches, was no different from a beggar. Seth said to her, I'm not a beggar. I'm here to buy clothes. I have money. The middle-aged woman crossed her arms and sneered. How much money do you even have? $10 or $20? You can't afford the clothes here. Don't come in and dirty my store. Seth suppressed his anger and said, I told you, I have money. Your store is open and you're running a business. Why won't you let me in? The middle-aged woman became furious. You're still insisting, are you? If you don't leave, I'll make you. As she spoke, she picked up a broomstick while staring fiercely at Seth. Do you want to buy clothes, mister? You can come over here instead. At this moment, a soft voice sounded from the side. Seth turned his head and saw a girl around 18 or 19 years old, speaking to him timidly. She looked very innocent, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. With her hair tied into 2 braids, she exuded youthfulness. The middle-aged woman scoffed disdainfully. Why, you little wench, even beggars can't escape your grasp, huh? Your dad's in the hospital, and if he finds out, I wonder if he'll be pissed to death. The 2 shops were next to each other, but their businesses were completely different. When it was after work or school hours, a lot of people would start crowding into the girl's store. Meanwhile, the middle-aged woman's store was deserted. Over time, she naturally became jealous and resentful toward the young girl. The girl's face turned red. Auntie, could you please not use such harsh words? The middle-aged woman's voice suddenly rose. You're blind as a bat. You're the auntie here. Can't you see that I'm only 30 years old? I think you're at least 50 years old, fatty. Seth snorted and then walked towards the girl's store. The middle-aged woman was about to explode from anger. She spat viciously. Nothing but a pair of bastards. Bah! She spat heavily on the ground and then turned and went back to her store. Seth's eyes flashed with cold light as he secretly flicked his finger. A burst of energy shot out and hit a certain trigger point on the middle-aged woman's body. She had no idea what had just happened. Then Seth followed the girl into the store. The store was not big, but it had a complete range of clothes. Mister, what kind of style do you want? The girl was very gentle, and her eyes were clear. There was not any trace of disdain or discomfort because of Seth's shabby clothes. Seth looked around the store. He did not have much preference for clothes, so long as they were comfortable and appropriate. He pointed to a certain shelf and said, That white sportswear, and that black one. The girl nodded. You're probably around 1.8 meters tall, so that would be XXL size. Mister, please wait a moment. The 2 sets of clothes that Seth wanted were hung at the top of the rack. The girl could not reach them with just a pole, so she brought a chair over. Unexpectedly, she lost her balance and started falling backward. Ack! The girl screamed, feeling as if the world was spinning and panic overtook her. She thought she was done for. However, in the next moment, she was enveloped in a warm embrace. Seth held the girl in his arms and asked, Are you okay? Ha! The girl thought she was going to be seriously injured this time, but Seth saved her. She smelled a pleasant scent coming from Seth and sensed a strong masculine energy. The girl immediately grew very shy, and her whole face turned red. She started speaking with a stutter. Thank you, Mr. Can you put me down now? Seth gently put her down and said, Be careful from now on. The girl lowered her head. Her face grew even redder. This was the first time she had been in such intimate contact with a man. I'll take them instead. Seth took the pole over and took down the 2 sets of clothes. The girl pointed to the left. The fitting room is over there. Seth took the clothes to the fitting room to try them on. His body was very slender. On the surface, he looked a bit thin, but his whole body was full of muscles without any excess fat. Every inch of flesh and blood contained explosive power and was extremely perfect. If any beautiful woman saw him like this, they would probably scream on the spot. After changing into the white sportswear, he put the old clothes in the cloth bag. He moved around casually, the size was just right. It had to be said that clothes make the man indeed. It was just very ordinary sportswear, but when worn by Seth it exuded a different charm. His face was clean and fair, and with his crew cut, Seth seemed like he was incredibly energetic. After the change of clothes, his temperament immediately changed. Seth was very satisfied and walked out of the fitting room. The girl's eyes lit up, and she said, "Mister, you look so handsome." Years of practice had made his figure extremely perfect. Coupled with his handsome appearance, it was easy to make people have a good impression of him. The girl thought of something else, and the blush that had just faded from her face reappeared. "Do you have shoes? Give me another pair of white sneakers," Seth said. "Oh, we do." The girl woke from her daydream and quickly found a pair of white sneakers for Seth. Seth tried them on. They fitted well and were very comfortable, much better than his worn-out cloth shoes. "How much in total?" The girl calculated. 200 for each set of clothes, 150 for the shoes. "That'll be 500 for you, mister." "No, that won't do. I can't let you suffer a loss." Seth shook his head. He could tell as soon as he came in that the clothes the girl was wearing had also been worn for many years. Plus, there were many markings on her hands, not as fair and tender as other ordinary girls. Just in a single glance, he could tell life had not been kind to her. It seemed that the girl's living condition was not good either. At the door just now, it seemed like he heard her father was in the hospital too. It was even more impossible for Seth to take advantage of the young girl. Nonetheless, the girl insisted. "You just saved me, mister. It's only right that I give you a discount." She was a girl with principles and did not want to overcharge Seth for anything. "Well, how about this?" Seth thought of a compromise. "I haven't eaten yet, so I'll give you $550, and you can treat me to a meal. Deal?" The girl thought about it and nodded. "Okay. But it'll just be a simple meal." After speaking, she looked at Seth nervously, afraid that he would refuse. Over the years, there have been many rich young men who have pursued her. Some of them were truly wealthy. However, the girl was not moved by any of them. For some reason, Seth gave her a very different feeling. Seth laughed and said, "I'm from the mountains, so I can eat anything." "That's great." The girl smiled with her eyes narrowed into 2 crescent moons. Ring ring. The old-fashioned phone in her pocket started ringing. The girl answered it, and a few seconds later, her face turned pale. The phone fell to the ground, and she lost all her strength, collapsing softly. Seth acted quickly and caught the girl. "What's wrong?" "The hospital called and my dad." "Woo." The girl cried out sadly and was struggling to leave. "No, I have to go to the hospital now." Seth followed. "Let me go with you." At this point, the girl no longer had her own judgment and simply wanted to get to the hospital as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Seth was the one who helped her close the store doors. They then hailed a taxi by the roadside. When they got in, Seth yelled at the driver, "The hospital! Please hurry." "Okay." The driver stepped on the gas and the car rushed away. The girl shrieked and leaned forward suddenly, about to hit the front. Seth quickly reached out and tried to block her. However, his hand placement when he did this was iffy. He quickly retracted his hand and said, "Sorry, it was not intentional." The girl shook her head, and although she would feel extremely embarrassed if it were any other time, her heart was solely focused on her father now. Suddenly, the driver cursed out, "Damn it, the traffic's congested up ahead. It seems there's been an accident. What do we do?" The girl was so anxious that she was about to cry. Seth looked outside and saw a long line of cars. Judging from the situation, the long queue probably would not be cleared for the next several hours. He gave the driver $10 and said, "We'll get off here." Then he took the girl and got out of the car. "Mister, what should we do now? My dad can't wait any longer." Tears were streaming down her face, which made people feel heartbroken. Seth suddenly picked her up bridal style and said, "Where's the hospital? I'll take you there." The girl was shocked. The hospital is still far away from here. Please put me down, mister." "It's okay. My physical strength isn't bad. Saving your father is the most important thing right now." The girl was deeply moved. She pointed in a direction and then heard the sound of rushing wind in her ears. Seth exerted force on both feet and suddenly burst into speed, galloping forward like a wild buffalo and weaving between cars. The drivers saw a shadow flashing by, and the air currents generated by his movement made their hair stand on end. What was that just now? Superman? Oh my God. Take out your phone and take a video. Seth was so fast that the girl had to lean her head on his chest to feel a little more comfortable. She felt inexplicably calm listening to Seth's steady and strong heartbeat. Seth sped through the streets and alleys. The journey that should have taken half an hour only took him about 10 minutes to arrive. He put the girl down and she quickly ran to the hospital room. Inside the room, a middle-aged man was lying there weakly. His skin was dull and lifeless and his cheeks sunken. His body emitted an odor. This was a state only seen when someone was close to death. Several doctors stood in front of the bed, shaking their heads slightly. It's kidney failure. There's no cure. What a pity. If he had a kidney transplant a month ago, we could have saved him. Among these doctors, there was one who particularly stood out. She was a beautiful woman who looked about 30 years old. Her face was delicate and she had on light makeup. She had a high and straight nose and small cherry lips. Even though she wore a loose robe, one could still vaguely see her impressive figure inside. The eyes of several male doctors occasionally glanced towards her, with a light flickering that only men could understand. "Dad!" The girl ran in and burst into tears when she saw the man on the bed. "Doctor, how's my dad doing now?" The beautiful female doctor sighed. "It's best you start preparing for his funeral." The girl felt her sight growing dark and almost fainted. She shook her head vigorously. "No, my dad is still so young. How can he die? Please, please save him." The beautiful female doctor sighed again. "We want to save him too, but there's no suitable kidney, and the cost will be at least 500,000. She knew that the girl's family was not very well off. Even if there was a suitable kidney, they might not be able to afford it. The girl's face turned white, and she felt like the sky was falling on her. She had lost her mother when she was a child and had relied on her father for everything. The whole world went black before her eyes. Then, Seth also walked into the hospital room and checked the man's pulse. Then, Seth said a sentence that shocked everyone in the ward. "Don't worry. I can save your father." The young girl widened her eyes. "Are you serious, mister?" Before Seth could answer, a male doctor got angry and said, "Who the hell are you? Don't sputter nonsense here." Another male doctor also said, "He has complete kidney failure, and that's in the case of both his kidneys. It's impossible to save him. Are you trying to deceive this young girl with such methods? How despicable." Even the beautiful female doctor frowned and had a very bad first impression of Seth. Faced with all of their doubts, Seth calmly said, "His kidneys have indeed failed completely, but there's still a chance to save him." The beautiful female doctor became even more disdainful of Seth and asked, "Then tell me, how do you plan to save him?" Even she, a senior doctor who studied abroad, had issued a critical illness notice. She did not believe that a teenager could save him. Would that not mean all the medical skills she had learned over the years were useless? Seth's gaze fell on the young girl. The most important thing was to make her believe that he could save her father. The 5 viscera of the human body correspond to the 5 elements. The liver corresponds to wood, the heart corresponds to fire, the spleen corresponds to earth, the lungs correspond to metal, and the kidneys correspond to water. And in the 5 elements, metal generates water. So as long as we use dry needling, it could stimulate the power of the lungs and nourish the kidneys. Finally, we activate the mutual generation of the 5 elements to form a closed loop, and his disease can be cured. Seth's explanation was simple, but in the entire Longford Kingdom, few doctors knew how to use dry needling to stimulate the power of the 5 viscera. The girl's eyes lit up when she heard this. "Really? Then please quickly help me save my father, mister." The beautiful doctor sneered. "Nonsense. There is no scientific basis for things like lungs being associated with metal and kidneys with water. Young lady, don't be fooled by him. This guy doesn't look like a good person at all." When the other male doctors saw this innocent young girl, they too did not want her to be deceived and spoke up, one after another. "That's right. Look at that kid. How can he have the ability to cure anyone at such a young age? You should trust the doctors. We are the authorities in this field." "He's right, little girl. You need to open your eyes and see more clearly." The girl was immediately confused again. She found that what the doctors said seemed to be true. Seth looked too young, like a high school student. Plus, in terms of medical skills, it was commonly believed that the older the doctors, the better their skills would be. Seth looked at the girl and said, "Well, since the doctors have all said that your father is beyond saving, why not let me try?" The girl thought that he somehow made sense and said, "Then please, give it a try, mister." In any case, she had no other choice. This hospital was the best in all of Jonesville. If they said it could not be done, she was out of options too. Seth nodded and took out a silver needle he carried with him. However, the beautiful doctor suddenly stepped forward and shouted at Seth, "Stop! Stop! You're not allowed to do anything harmful to my patient." The beautiful doctor was angry, and it was a rare sight. Her eyes were sharp and fierce. Several male doctors also gathered around upon seeing Seth move. Seth could not be bothered by these guys and merely looked at the girl. "This is your father. You should decide whether or not you'd like to save him. To treat a patient, one would first need the consent of their family." "Mister, please save him. We already know what the worst outcome will be. Please don't make things difficult for him, doctors," the beautiful doctor said with resentment. "Don't let him deceive you, young lady. This guy doesn't look like a good person." "Shut up," Seth suddenly yelled out. It was like a tiger roaring, and the whole ward was shaken. Except for the patient and the girl, everyone else's mind went blank, the fear evident in their eyes. Seth snorted. Even the family member had agreed. "So what's it to your people? Do you have the right to intervene here?" After speaking, Seth no longer paid attention to these frightened guys and began to take action. First, he disinfected the silver needles with alcohol, then began to dry needling the patient. The 13 needles of transmigration. Only with this formation, coupled with his own abundant true energy, could he save the patient. Seth's expression was serious, and one after another he pierced each trigger point. "He's dead for sure." The beautiful doctor gritted her teeth. "This is murder." She was angry and felt that her professionalism was being questioned. "What happened?" A slightly older voice sounded from behind. Several doctors turned and saw an old man with half-white hair and good spirits standing there. "Dr. Camage." "Good afternoon, Dr. Camage. The thing is," the beautiful doctor explained the situation. "What nonsense." Dr. Camage looked toward the hospital bed. However, in the next moment his pupils suddenly narrowed. "That's the 13 needles of transmigration?" He was greatly shocked, and his eyes could not move away from Seth. The beautiful doctor asked, "Dr. Camage, what are the 13 needles of transmigration?" Dr. Camage never took his eyes off Seth, and he replied, "The 13 needles of transmigration is the strongest dry needling technique in the ancient Longford Kingdom. Once this technique is used, it'd be difficult to die even if you want to." Several doctors felt like they were listening to some legend and were very skeptical. How could there be such medical skills in this world? At this moment, Seth had already pierced in the last needle. The 13 needles trembled slightly, forming a closed loop. Suddenly, the patient's breath disappeared, and the instrument's alarm sounded. The beautiful female doctor exclaimed in shock, "He's dead! You murdered him!" Seth scolded. "Shut up, you brainless woman! You're such an idiot." From the moment he came in, the woman had been chattering nonstop. That was getting really annoying. The beautiful female doctor's face turned pale. She has never been scolded like this before. Just as she was about to retort, what happened next was something she would never forget. She saw Seth pull the silver needles out one by one. When the last silver needle was out, the patient, who they had given up on, opened his eyes. Although he still looked weak, a hint of rosy color appeared on his face. The electrocardiogram slowly rose to the safety level. "Dad, how are you feeling?" The girl rushed over and cried tears of joy. "I just slept for a while and I feel much better." "Woo! That's great, Dad." The girl was so happy that she did not know what to say. "That's impossible." The beautiful female doctor took a few steps back. What she saw was beyond her understanding. The other male doctors also had a look of disbelief. Dr. Camage hurried over and politely said to Seth, "Hello there. I'm Howard Camage, the director of this hospital. May I ask who taught you your medical skills?" This scene once again made the doctor's head spin. Dr. Camage was highly skilled in medicine and very well respected. Even some people with higher social status would be polite to him when they met him. Yet Dr. Camage was so respectful to a little kid right now. "I'm sorry, no comment." Seth's master had warned him early on that he must never reveal his identity at any time. Seth guessed that perhaps Chief had offended many people when he was young. Truthfully, he was mistaken. Chief did not allow him to reveal his identity because he had saved too many people in the past, including many powerful people. If Seth's identity were revealed, he would be elevated by those powerful people without needing to go through any trials, which was a very dangerous thing. Howard was somewhat disappointed, but he did not mind too much. Instead, he took out his business card and handed it over. "Young man, your medical skills are superb. Can we exchange some pointers in the future?" Seth considered the old man's attitude pretty good, so he did not refuse and took the card. "You look like a pretty good guy, old man. But the doctors under your supervision are terrible and have no manners." Seth said this while looking at the beautiful female doctor. She was both angry and helpless but could not argue back. After all, it was indeed her problem. Howard smiled wryly. "Georgia has a somewhat extreme personality, so please don't mind her." Seth did not want to bicker with a woman, so he said, "Help this uncle get discharged from the hospital." Georgia Mood wanted to speak, but she was stopped by Howard's gaze. This made her very unhappy. Was this move not just silently stating that they were incompetent? In truth, Seth was only considering that the girl's family conditions were not good, so staying in the hospital longer would be very expensive. Moreover, her father was no longer in life-threatening danger, so he only needed to rest at home for a while. Howard nodded. "Okay, let's have Georgia handle this." Georgia was fuming, feeling more and more unhappy about the situation. Nonetheless, she did not dare to defy Howard's orders, and before leaving, she gave Seth a fierce glare. Then she left, clicking her heels as she went. Half an hour later, they completed the hospital discharge procedures, and the three of them left the hospital. On the way, the father and daughter expressed their gratitude toward Seth. He not only saved a life but also saved a family and the future of a young girl in her prime. During their conversation, Seth also learned the girl's name, Willow Larson. Her father's name was Woody Larson. After sending the father and daughter home, Seth was ready to take his leave. Willow blushed and said, "Seth, it's so late now. Why don't you stay here for the night and have some food?" Woody also said, "Yes, you're our benefactor. If you leave like this, we'll have a bad conscience for the rest of our lives." Under the strong insistence of the father and daughter, Seth agreed to stay the night. Woody was still weak and went to the bedroom to rest after returning home. Meanwhile, Willow happily went to the market to buy groceries. Today was the happiest day for her in more than a decade. Before leaving, Willow had pulled Seth into her room to sit in there. Willow had too busy to put away her undergarments, so the living room was messy and there was nowhere to sit. Without doing anything. Then she left. Instead, blushing from ear to ear, cross-legged and began to practice on the edge of the Medicine King scripture. That had already reached the peak of a 9th-ranked warrior half a year ago, and he was a rare martial arts genius in this millennium. According to Chief, there was a whole new world above the 9th-ranked warrior. However, in the past 6 months, no matter how much Seth practiced, he could not make any progress. An hour later, Willow came back and started cooking. Soon, the aroma spread throughout the room. Seth stopped practicing and walked to the kitchen, where he saw Willow cooking earnestly. The scene was warm and cozy. Willow was undoubtedly a virtuous and lovely girl. While normal girls her age were still studying, she had to shoulder the burden of life. "Why are you here, Seth? The kitchen is smoky, so go and wait outside." Seth shook his head and asked, "It's all right. Are you in college right now?" Willow looked a little downcast and replied, "I got accepted into Jonesville University, but..." Seth knew why without her having to say it. He silently vowed to use some of his $200 million to pay for Willow's tuition. Such a good girl should not be wasting her potential. Woody had just recovered from a serious illness and could not eat greasy food. Hence, Willow fed him some chicken broth. At the dinner table, Willow opened 2 cans of beer, one for each of them. "A toast to you, Seth. Thank you for saving my dad," she said, raising her beer can to her mouth. Then, her eyebrows furrowed, indicating that she probably did not drink on a normal basis. Before Seth could stop her, she had already drunk half of it. After letting out a hiccup, she blushed, making her cheeks look ripe and tempting. "If you can't drink, then don't drink. It's okay. It's a joyous occasion," said Willow as she served Seth a dish. "Try this oyster." Willow had prepared a table full of dishes that were hearty and delicious. Seth nodded as he ate and complimented her cooking skills, saying, "Whoever marries you will be a lucky person." Willow's eyes were a bit hazy and she became shy when she heard this. She quietly asked Seth, "Seth, do you have a girlfriend?" Seth shook his head.
No.
Willow was overjoyed. Not long after, the little girl got drunk and passed out. Seth tried to wake her and when there was no response, carried her into the bedroom. At that moment, Willow was just like a defenseless girl that could be taken advantage of at any time. Her face was red, her eyes tightly closed, and her eyelashes trembling slightly. Her skin was white as snow, and she looked very appealing. Seth's heart started to beat a little faster. He slowly put Willow down, covered her with a blanket, and walked out of the bedroom. Although he was at an age filled with youthful vigor, he would not do anything inappropriate. He slept in the living room instead. He got up promptly at 6 in the morning. The first thing he did was to check his old-fashioned mobile phone to check if the money had been wired. Not yet. Seth frowned. It was transferred at 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Let's wait a little longer. After taking out his toothbrush and toothpaste from his backpack and freshening up, Seth gave Woody another treatment. However, this time it was not the 13 needles of transmigration, just a simple dry needling treatment for recuperation. Thank you very much. Woody expressed his gratitude. He could clearly feel that he was in a much better state than yesterday. Seth waved his hand and said, "No need to thank me. Healing the sick is just my duty." The longer Woody looked at Seth, the more satisfied he became. "Dad, Seth?" Willow pushed the door open and called crisply. She looked a little embarrassed and dared not look at Seth. She had actually gotten drunk last night and woke up in her own bed. It was obvious that Seth had carried her there. She did not know if he had done anything last night. Thinking about this, she became even more embarrassed, but she did not feel disgusted at all. Woody chuckled. "You're up? Hurry up and make breakfast." "Oh yes, I got it." She did not need to ask, as she could see that Woody was recovering quite well. He had much rosier skin now. This made her even more grateful to Seth. After breakfast, Seth wrote down a recipe for food supplements for Willow. If you make these for him for a month, he'll be completely healed. After finishing up, he said, "I should go now." Willow's heart tightened. "Where are you going, Seth?" "To Jonesville University." Seth touched her head. "Your dad is okay now, so you can go to school. As for the tuition fee, I can lend it to you first. You can pay me back slowly when you have money in the future." He did not say he would just give it to her. This girl seemed fragile, but her self-esteem was still very strong. Willow bit her lip slightly. "Why are you so good to me?" Seth joked. "Because I want to trick you into being my little wife." Willow's face turned red again, and she weakly said, "Okay." "What?" Seth did not hear clearly, as she spoke too softly. "No, nothing." Willow shook her head repeatedly. "Okay then, it's settled. Give me your phone number." Willow quickly gave her number. With that, Seth finally left. Willow looked at Seth's back, reluctant to part with him. Seth arrived at the bus stop and looked for the route to Jonesville University. The roads seemed particularly busy today, with constant traffic congestion. Seth turned his back to the road while looking at the bus route. Whoosh! Suddenly, a luxury sports car zoomed past, screeching to a halt, the tires making an unpleasant noise as they screeched against the ground. The car window rolled down, and a man said while smoking a cigarette, "It's so lively today. I think everyone is here to celebrate my grandpa's birthday." Seth, who was looking at the route, frowned slightly. He recognized the owner of this voice. It was Finley. In the driver's seat, a charming voice sounded, "What gift are you planning to give your grandpa this time?" Finley laughed and said, "Let me tell you something. Yesterday a fool sold 5% of his shares to my dad. It was worth 200 million, but my dad called the bank right after to cancel the transfer. So, I got my hands on 200 million for doing nothing yesterday. Let's go to the antique shop first and buy my grandpa a few $1,000,000 of antiques to make him happy." Seth turned around with a grim face, but the sports car had already zoomed away. Watching the car disappear from view, Seth's face turned cold. "Ha! You people dare to plot something like this against me? This is simply asking for trouble." He took out his old phone and called Jack. He needed to know where Finley's grandfather's birthday celebration was to be held. After getting the address, he went into a supermarket, bought a clock, wrapped it up, and headed to the city center. On the other end, Jack hung up the phone and thought to himself, "So Mr. Yeager is planning on going over to celebrate Josiah Zachary's birthday? Then I must also go." At the front of the Zachary family's mansion, it was extremely lively today. All the powerful figures in Jonesville had arrived, with all kinds of luxury cars parked outside. It was Josiah Zachary's 80th birthday, and the guy was also a legendary figure. He was a third-ranked warrior with many industries under his name. In addition to Herman Corp., he also managed more than 10 entertainment venues, and his connections were extremely wide. In Jonesville, the Zacharys could be considered a top-notch wealthy family. Dawn's Real Estate has presented a pair of white jade and emerald. Integrity Antique has presented a string of rare prayer beads. Charles's pawnshop had presented a pair of diamonds. At the door, the steward was continuously announcing the gifts from each household in a loud voice. Any one of these gifts was worth 6 figures. Finally, Seth arrived. He was carrying a black plastic bag with a cold face. As soon as he appeared, he immediately attracted many people's attention. On such an important occasion, everyone dressed to the nines. He was the only one wearing sportswear, which was really out of place. Ignoring the many strange glances, Seth walked toward the gate. He was stopped soon after. A bodyguard in a suit and sunglasses asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" "I'm here to wish Josiah Zachary a happy birthday. Move aside." Seth's aura was all-encompassing, and the bodyguard was immediately intimidated. By the time he came to his senses, Seth had already walked past him. When he arrived in front of the steward, he casually gave him what he was carrying. The steward instinctively took it, opened it up, and saw that it was a clock. "A guest has presented a clock." He immediately reacted after announcing the gift, and his face changed drastically. "What? Are you provoking me?" At this moment, Seth had already arrived in the inner hall. Inside were leaders from various industries in Jonesville. Josiah was 80 years old, but he still looked very energetic. There was an occasional gleam in his eyes that made people not dare underestimate him. It was lively at first, but when they heard that someone outside had sent over a clock, the scene immediately became cold. The clock symbolized that his time was up. Josiah's smile faded as well. Quincy, who was waiting by the side, slammed the table and angrily exclaimed, "Who dares to send such an ominous thing today?" "Me." Seth walked in. His gaze was like lightning as he looked at Quincy. "You have some nerve to try and trick me, huh? So it was you, you little beast." Quincy snorted. "This is not a place for you. Kneel and beg mercy from my father. Then get out of here." Seth stood with his arms crossed. "Who the hell do you think you are? First, transfer the 200 million to me on the spot. Second, everyone in the Zachary family should kneel down and apologize to me." Seth thought he was already being lenient with this punishment. If it were not for his master's last words that stated he should always use reasoning instead of force, he would have just wiped out the Zacharys right away. Ha ha ha. As soon as he said this, all the guests burst into laughter. Where did this kid come from? He's hilarious. Does he even know what he's talking about? A wild child wants to make the entire Zachary family kneel and apologize to him? He's dead for sure. Finley looked grim. "You little beast, you're the first person ever that dare extort the Zacharys. If you don't want to live, then die." Seth felt amused. "Extortion? Aren't you shameless? Back then, when Chief saved Quincy Zachary, you gave him a 5% share in the company. Yesterday, when I tried to sell the stake back to you, you intercepted the funds with the bank instead. You're the utterly shameless ones." Seth also reflected on himself in secret. It was his lack of social experience that led to this outcome. What nonsense! Finley was furious. The Zacharys have always been proper and upright. Don't come in here and slander us. Guards, take him out. Wait! Josiah spoke up and looked directly at Seth. "Young man, today is my birthday, and I don't want it to end unpleasantly. Here's what I'll do. I'll give you 100,000, and you can take your leave now." Finley immediately understood and took a checkbook from his pocket, writing 100,000 in a flash before walking up to Seth. "I've seen many people like you who just want money. Here you go. 100,000, enough for you to use for a long, long time." The check in his hand was raised in front of Seth. Then he suddenly released it and let it fall to the ground. Finley sneered. "Well, pick up the check and get out of here, hick." There was a burst of laughter, and all the bigwigs looked at Seth with ridicule, as if he were a clown. Seth did not even glance at the check on the ground. One chooses his own path. Hence, I now declare that the Zacharys are done for. This statement provoked another burst of laughter. Each of them looked at him with a look as if they were looking at a fool. Did he say the Zacharys were done for? The Zacharys were thriving and powerful. A little brat saying that they were done for was as ridiculous as him saying that he wanted to pluck the moon from the sky. Josiah's face darkened slightly. Young man, we're a kind and benevolent family. I've even given you money. What else do you want? You can't be too greedy, or you'll easily get into trouble. His words were full of threats. Seth was too lazy to waste any more of his spit. He looked around and said, "Today is about my personal grudge with the Zacharys. All of you better leave to avoid getting hurt." "How presumptuous!" A middle-aged man with a muscular face shouted at Seth. "Do you have a death wish? How dare you threaten us?" A beautiful but plump woman said with a cold smile, "Mr. Josiah is kind-hearted and doesn't want to take action against you. Let us handle this small matter instead." One by one, the dignitaries expressed their positions. This was a good opportunity for the Zacharys to owe them a favor, and no one was willing to let the chance slide. Soon, they sent in their bodyguards, numbering in the hundreds. Each one had bulging muscles and fierce eyes. Finley pretended to be insincerely courteous at this time. "Although you came to my house and extorted money from us first, the Zacharys are kind-hearted. We'll give you another chance. Take the money and leave. Let bygones be bygones." Smack! Seth slapped Finley across the face. "You talk too much, idiot." He merely used a little force, but Finley's body spun 360 degrees in the air before falling heavily to the ground. Half of his face was extremely swollen. His eyes opened wide, and he immediately passed out. In this slap, Seth had added in some dark energy. It might not be noticeable now, but once it erupts in a few days, without a 7th-ranked or higher warrior intervening, it will be a sure death for him. This slap made the whole hall turn unusually quiet. Quincy roared frantically, "You beast! How dare you hit my son? What are you all waiting for? Kill him on the spot." After speaking, he immediately ran to the unconscious Finley. After receiving the order, many of the bodyguards swung their iron rods fiercely toward Seth's head. Seth's face turned cold. It seemed that he was going to have a killing spree today. A powerful true energy was flowing in his body. Once it erupted, it would be earth-shattering. "Stop!" Nonetheless, at this moment, a loud shout came from outside.